The sound that woke me wasn't thunder or coyotes. It was sharper than both, that metallic twang a fence wire makes when it snaps under tension. The kind of sound that cuts straight through sleep and settles in your gut like a warning. Before I even opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong. Out here, you don't mistake that sound. You feel it in your bones. When I sat up, the air in my room carried that damp scent of trampled grass and stirred dust, faint, but enough to tell me the herd was restless. 50 head of black Angus shifting in the dark makes a rhythm you can almost feel through the floorboards. I swung my legs out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the windowsill, and slid my boots on without socks. By the time I stepped out onto the porch, that pre-dawn chill met me like a whisper. It was the kind of breeze that says something's out there waiting to be found. My land runs up against a row of houses that don't belong here. Sycamore Ridge, a development that sprang up 5 years ago like a glossy catalog no one asked for. Perfect lawns, imported trees, and more rules than a courthouse. And right at the top of that little kingdom sits their president, Melissa Vaughn, a woman who believes property values are sacred and anything rural is an infection. Now, my acreage isn't part of their HOA, never has been. My family's deed goes back 3 generations, back to when this land was a dairy, and the road wasn't even paved. But Melissa talks like maps are suggestions, and my fence line is a personal insult. 2 weeks back, she stood on my driveway in her spotless sneakers, telling me my livestock management practices might not meet community standards. I told her my cows didn't care much for bylaws, and that my fence had been keeping them in since before her cul-de-sac had a name. She smiled the way someone does when they already have a plan. So when I heard that wire snap, I didn't need a flashlight to guess who might have helped it along. But I brought it anyway, beam cutting through the mist as I walked the fence line. My heart beat a steady drum against the quiet. Every step felt heavier, my boots sinking into the dew-soaked ground. When I found the break, the scene told its story clear as daylight. The wire was clean cut, not frayed, not stretched, but sliced with purpose. Both ends curled back neatly, tied off like someone trying to hide the evidence. And lying there in the grass, half hidden by clover, was a pair of orange-handled bolt cutters still shining wet from the morning dew. I knelt down, ran my fingers along the severed wire, and let out a slow breath. "Well, you did it, didn't you, Melissa?" I muttered to no one, because I could already see where this was heading, straight toward her manicured paradise. And sure enough, when I lifted my eyes, I saw them, 50 hungry, curious cows drifting across her perfect emerald lawn like a black tide under moonlight. Heads down, tails flicking, chewing their way through everything green. A couple of calves trampled through her rose garden, while one of my older steers stood proud and patient right in the middle of her limestone walkway like he'd been elected mayor. It was chaos wrapped in poetry, and right there on her porch stood Melissa Vaughn herself, frozen like a statue in a silk robe and foam curlers, holding the very same bolt cutters I'd just seen twin to the ones in the grass. For a second she didn't move. Then she made this half-strangled gasp, the kind that sounds like someone realizing the trick they pulled just backfired. The cows, of course, didn't care about her horror. They kept right on with their breakfast, stripping hedges like it was a buffet laid out just for them. By the time I reached the fence post, half the neighborhood was awake, porch lights flicking on, curtains twitching, the quiet click of camera phones capturing the scene of the year. I didn't say a word. I just leaned against the post, watching my cows redecorate Sycamore Ridge. You learn in this life that sometimes nature does the teaching for you. Melissa finally snapped out of her trance and started yelling, though I couldn't make out much more than the word trespassing and you'll pay for this. She waved her arms like she was scolding the weather. My cows, naturally, took it as an invitation to chew slower. And then came the cherry on top. Old Mr. Dawson, the retired mailman from 2 doors down, stepped out in his slippers, took one look at the scene and hollered, "Guess the grass really is greener, Eli." His laugh rolled across the cul-de-sac like thunder breaking tension. That was when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, red and blue lights bouncing off the shiny windows. Deputy Tom Ray stepped out, eyes taking in the wire, the bolt cutters, the herd, and finally Melissa. She pointed at me, shouting about negligence, sabotage, and danger to the community. But Tom just crouched, picked up the cutters, bagged them, and gave me a look that said, "Don't worry, this one's righting itself." By mid-morning, I had the herd rounded back into the pasture and the fence patched temporarily tight. The sun climbed, warming the damp air, and for a moment, peace felt close again. But that didn't last. When I got back to the porch, a crisp white envelope waited on my mailbox. Sycamore Ridge letterhead, gold embossed. Inside, a notice addressed to Mr. Eli C. Carter, misspelled and all, ordering me to attend a disciplinary hearing for negligent livestock containment. It also included a $5,000 assessment for community landscape restoration. Now, my land's a good 100 yards outside their jurisdiction. They knew that. But Melissa never needed facts to fuel her crusades. I could picture her at her kitchen table, robes cinched tight, typing that notice like a declaration of war. I laughed so hard my coffee nearly came through my nose. Then I walked to the shed, grabbed heavier gauge wire, and rebuilt that whole stretch stronger than before. I hung new yellow signs along the fence. Private property. Do not cut, livestock enclosed. Mostly for her conscience, not the law. That night, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I told myself I'd ignore her summons. Let her talk to her own reflection. But then again, I've learned something about people like Melissa Vaughn. They crumble fastest not under anger, but under calm defiance. So I decided I'd go. Sit right there in her precious hearing, smile polite, and let her realize in front of everyone just how far her rules really reached. And when I thought that, I couldn't help but grin, because this feud, whether she knew it or not, had only just begun. When I walked into the Sycamore Ridge clubhouse that Thursday evening, the smell of lemon polish and artificial flowers hit me like a bad memory. Every surface gleamed too bright, too new, too sterile to belong in the same zip code as dirt or hay. I'd spent my life breathing in cedar dust and cowhide. This place smelled like rules. The room was already full, board members lined up behind a folding table, residents packed into plastic chairs facing them like a jury waiting for the show to start. And there at the center, gripping a small wooden gavel like it gave her superpowers, sat Melissa Vaughn. Her hair was perfect again, every curl shellacked into position, her smile stretched thin as piano wire. I could feel a few eyes on me when I stepped in. The farmer in flannel among the pressed khakis. My boots left faint tracks of dust on their polished tile, honest dirt, and I didn't bother wiping it off. Melissa cleared her throat into the microphone and began reading from a neatly printed statement. Her voice carried that tone of someone who has already declared victory. Tonight's meeting is to address the negligent containment and public endangerment caused by Mr. Eli Carter's livestock breach on the morning of July 8th. I stood there, arms crossed, letting her talk. She had a rhythm to her accusations: negligence, community disruption, property depreciation, the usual HOA gospel. The neighbors nodded like parishioners, though a few were clearly fighting back smiles. When she finished her monologue, she looked up with a kind of triumph, expecting applause. I raised my hand slowly. "One small thing before we go any further," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm not part of your HOA." The words hung there like a struck bell. The man at the far end of the table, I recognized him as Paul Hastings, the guy who jogs past my fence every morning, shifted in his seat. "Actually," he muttered half to himself, "he's right. His parcel sits outside our charter line." The room stirred. A few whispers. Melissa blinked once hard, then forced a smile back onto her face. "Nevertheless," she said tightly, "your actions directly affected our community, and the board retains the right to pursue restitution." I almost admired her commitment to the delusion. Almost. I leaned forward a little, resting my hands on the back of the chair in front of me. "My cows were contained just fine until someone cut that fence," I said. "Deputy Ray has the bolt cutters to prove it." You could feel the shift, the kind that happens when truth walks into the room and no one knows where to look. Melissa tried to steer back to her script. "There is no evidence." "Sure there is," I said quietly. "It's bagged and tagged. Sheriff's office has the report." The silence that followed had weight. For a few long seconds, all you could hear was the hum of the air conditioner. Then she rapped the gavel once, a nervous tap more than authority. "This meeting will reconvene once legal counsel is present," she announced. Her voice had gone brittle. I smiled just a little. "I'll bring mine too," I said. "Maybe a few neighbors who enjoyed the lawn show." A ripple of laughter spread through the room, low but unstoppable. Even Paul Hastings cracked a grin. And that was when I knew the crowd wasn't entirely hers anymore. Melissa banged the gavel again, harder this time, cheeks coloring. "Order! We will have order!" But the more she fought for control, the less she had. By the time I stepped back outside, dusk had settled over the cul-de-sac. Porch lights blinked on in perfect symmetry, as if the whole place ran on timers instead of heartbeats. The air smelled like cut grass and wounded pride. I didn't go straight home. I sat in my truck for a while, watching the clubhouse windows. Through the glass, I could still see Melissa pacing in front of her board, gesturing wildly, her voice muted behind the pane. She wasn't used to cracks in her armor, and tonight she'd felt one split right down the middle. Back home, the pasture looked peaceful again, wire tight, posts straight, herd calm and slow in the fading light. I poured myself coffee, black as the soil, and sat on the porch rail listening to the crickets. That's when I got the idea, not revenge, just correction. The next morning, I logged into the neighborhood Facebook group, the same one Melissa used to post her monthly community standards reminders. I typed out a short message, polite and to the point. For anyone concerned about last night's cattle incident, the herd is secured. The fence was compromised by an unknown party, and law enforcement has documented the report. Thanks to the neighbors who helped out. No names, no accusations, just facts. Then I put the phone down and went about my chores. By noon, my post had nearly 200 comments. Videos appeared, shaky cell phone clips of cows and rose bushes, Melissa shouting in her robe, the bolt cutters glinting on the lawn. Someone even turned one clip into a meme, my old bull standing in front of her walkway under the caption "Free Lawn Service. Call Eli's Cattle Co. by sundown." Melissa's profile had disappeared. 2 mornings later, a delivery truck from White Fence Coner pulled up to her driveway. I watched from the fence line as a crew unloaded panels of glossy white vinyl. Melissa stood nearby, arms crossed, chin high, directing every measurement like a general in retreat. By afternoon, she had a fence taller than any in Sycamore Ridge, pristine, seamless, utterly photogenic. She caught me watching and gave me that smile, the same one she'd used 2 weeks ago when she thought she could outsmart a rancher with rules. Checkmate, that look said. I tipped my coffee mug her way and smiled back. Because I've been around livestock long enough to know one thing for certain: cows love to scratch. And that shiny new fence wasn't built to withstand affection. Sure enough, 3 days later, I heard it, a hollow crack drifting over the morning fog. I walked to the line and found a cow named Bessie leaning her full weight against one of those vinyl panels, blissfully scratching her flank. The panel bowed like a drumhead, groaned, and then popped free from its mounts. Another cow took her cue and joined in, rubbing down the length of the fence like it was a carnival ride. By the time Melissa came running out, half the fence was bent inward, panels twisted like wet cardboard. She pointed furious, shouting words I couldn't quite catch from my side. Something about cruelty, damage, irresponsibility. I just leaned on my own wire, steady and tight, and watched the show. Later that afternoon, Animal Control arrived, Officer Sonia Whitaker and her partner. They walked the line, took one look at her side, and said the same thing I'd been thinking. "Ma'am, this is ornamental, not a livestock barrier." Melissa's face did that thing again. Pride meeting physics and losing. News travels fast in small towns. Someone created a parody account for her fence that same night, posting updates like it was a soldier's diary. Day 6. Another panel falls. Morale low. Cows triumphant. I couldn't help but laugh. But humor doesn't stop people like Melissa. It fuels them. And I could feel in my gut, she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I'd seen stubborn before. You don't raise cattle, mend fences, and live beside weather without learning how pride digs in its heels. But Melissa Vaughn's kind of stubborn was a different breed altogether, the kind that mistakes control for safety and doubles down every time the world proves otherwise. A week after her vinyl fence collapsed like a cheap tent, the HOA sent out a notice. Emergency community meeting. Safety concerns regarding adjacent property. I didn't need to read between the lines. When the words adjacent property appear in Sycamore Ridge paperwork, they mean me. By that point, the neighborhood had turned the cow saga into entertainment. Kids played stampede in the cul-de-sac, running in circles and mooing at each other. Someone even put a cardboard cutout of a cow in front of Melissa's driveway with a sign that said, "Caution, grazing area." But inside that woman's house, I imagine it wasn't laughter. It was planning. The morning after the notice went out, I woke to the rumble of machinery. When I stepped onto my porch, I saw a flatbed truck parked in front of her yard carrying a structure that looked like something out of a penitentiary. Steel posts, reinforced bars, motorized gate, the kind of thing designed to keep out more than livestock. By afternoon, a crane was lowering the gate into place, a keypad entry, a camera mount, reinforced hinges. She stood nearby supervising the install like a foreman, arms crossed and sunglasses reflecting the whole operation. The crew worked fast, driven by her sharp instructions. By sundown, the gate stood complete, tall, silver, and absurdly overbuilt. The neighbors gathered at their mailboxes, whispering. One of them, old Mr. Dawson, chuckled low and said, "Well, I guess the Alamo's back." Someone else called it Fortress Melissa, and within an hour that name stuck like burrs in wool. Melissa didn't seem to mind. She even took photos of it that evening, posing proudly in front of the keypad as if she'd just secured national treasure. I just shook my head, poured myself another cup of coffee, and watched the sunset paint her new monument gold. The thing about pride, though, is it doesn't check the weather. 2 nights later, a summer storm rolled in from the west, fast and furious, the kind that turns red clay into soup and lights up the sky like a war movie. The rain came hard enough to make the gutters sing, wind whipping through the pasture like a restless ghost. I sat by the window with a lantern, watching lightning flash against that shiny new gate. At around 2 a.m, a sound split. Through the storm, a deep metallic groan followed by the unmistakable crunch of something heavy giving up the fight. I threw on my coat and boots, flashlight cutting through sheets of rain. What I found made me stop in my tracks. The great Fortress Melissa Gate, her symbol of victory, had seized mid-cycle when the power cut out. The motor locked, half open, half closed, suspended in defiance until gravity took over. The entire structure had dropped its weight onto the hood of Melissa's white Lexus, crushing it like a tin can. The rain didn't hide my laughter. It rolled out of me, half disbelief, half poetic justice. Within minutes, half the cul-de-sac was awake. People stood on porches and bathrobes, phones raised, lightning strobing across the scene. The tow crew showed up before dawn, winching the mangled gate off the car, while Deputy Tom Ray directed traffic, trying and failing to keep a straight face. When Melissa stepped outside, her umbrella flipped backward in the wind. Her voice cut through the rain, shrill, furious, desperate to reclaim control. But the scene didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the mud, the metal, and the laughter she couldn't silence. By morning, photos of the wreck were already online. Steel gate versus Lexus. Local HOA president loses both. That's when the lawsuit came. A week later, a certified letter arrived at my door. Melissa Vaughn versus Eli Carter. The claim, emotional. Distress, property destruction, public ridicule, $50,000 in damages. I sat on the porch swing, turning the envelope over in my hands, feeling equal parts exasperated and amused. Pride, once again, was riding shotgun. I called up Nate Burnham, a local attorney who preferred fishing over courtrooms but had a reputation for clean wins. He showed up to the hearing in a wrinkled gray suit, looking more like he'd rather be at the river, but his eyes were sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Melissa arrived with a polished attorney from the city, gelled hair, silver tie, and enough arrogance to fill the room. They rolled in exhibits, photos of the mangled fence, the crushed gate, her ruined landscaping. She spoke like she was addressing a jury on national television. When it was Nate's turn, he didn't waste words. He simply lifted a document from his folder and began to read Deputy Ray's report, detailing the night the fence had been cut and the orange-handled bolt cutters found near the scene. Then, with the kind of quiet timing that makes a room hold its breath, he set those same cutters on the evidence table. They made a satisfying clatter. Melissa's lawyer tried to object, but Nate just smiled and said, "Relevant, Your Honor. It shows a pattern." Then came the witnesses. Mr. Dawson testified first, telling the court about the nightgown stampede, as he called it. His retelling was so dryly factual, it might as well have been comedy. Then Mrs. Voss, the oldest resident in Sycamore Ridge, stood and said, "The only danger I saw that night was Melissa yelling at cows like they could read bylaws." The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge's mouth twitched. When the final statement was read, the judge leaned forward, hands clasped. "I see no grounds for the plaintiff's claims," he said evenly, "and substantial evidence supporting the defendant's counterclaim." The gavel dropped like the closing note of a hymn. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt cleaner. Neighbors shook my hand. Some even clapped me on the back. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly, but I let the satisfaction settle quietly in my chest. Melissa walked past, face pale as chalk, her lawyer trailing behind. She didn't look at me, and for once I didn't feel the need to look at her either. The score was settled, but peace wasn't guaranteed. Because pride doesn't retreat. It reloads. And as I stood there on the courthouse steps, watching her climb into a rental car, I knew this wasn't the last time her name would echo across my fence line, not by a long shot. Peace lasted about 3 weeks, long enough for me to start thinking maybe, just maybe, Melissa Vaughn had finally learned that some fences weren't meant to be fought. I should have known better. It started small. Little things. I might have missed if I wasn't the kind of man who notices when a gate latch leans an inch to the left. First, my mailbox. Bent just slightly one morning, hinge twisted. Then came the flyers tucked under my windshield wipers. Protect your property values. Stop negligent neighbors. No name attached. But the typeface matched every HOA memo Melissa ever sent. The real trouble came 2 weeks later. On a Sunday morning, quiet and hot enough to melt the tar on the county road. I was checking the east pasture when I noticed a patch of grass near the fence line had gone pale. Not yellow from drought, but sickly, almost white. The kind of dying that doesn't happen natural. At first I thought maybe a fuel leak or runoff. But when I crouched down, the smell hit me. Sharp, chemical, like antifreeze and death. I knew that scent. Herbicide. The strong kind. The one no farm supply would sell without a license. My heart sank, then burned. That line of grass wasn't just random. It traced the border where my property met the back of Melissa's lot, running neat as a ruler. Someone had poured poison straight through the fence. I followed it for 30 yards, boots sinking in the soft dirt. Every few steps I saw the same thing. Dead roots, blistered stems, small insects curled like ash. Near one post, a single plastic bottle lay half buried. Label peeled, cap missing, but the residue was unmistakable. Glyphosate concentrate. Industrial grade. I didn't need to see her name on the bottle. I could already picture the scene. Her at night, flashlight low, pouring death through the fence like revenge in liquid form. By noon, Deputy Ray was at my gate again. He crouched by the dead strip, took photos, bagged the bottle, and let out a long, slow whistle. "She's escalating," he said. I nodded, jaw tight. "She's desperate." He rubbed his chin. "You want me to bring in environmental protection?" Could classify this as contamination. I looked out over my pasture. Cows grazing, calves nursing, life continuing despite it all. "Not yet," I said. "Let's see what she does when she realizes I know." That night I parked my truck in the barn, left the lights off, and waited. The moon was high and the crickets were loud, but I could still hear it. The faint hum of an electric golf cart on the asphalt road. Around midnight, I saw her. Melissa, in a pale hoodie, creeping along her side of the fence with a flashlight beam low to the ground. She stopped every few yards, inspecting, muttering to herself. The light glinted off something in her hand. Maybe another bottle. Maybe not. I stepped out from the shadow of the barn and called, calm but clear. "Evening." "Melissa." She froze, the beam snapping up toward me. Her voice shook, not from fear but from being caught. "You're trespassing with your light," she snapped. I smiled, slow. "Funny, the fence line says otherwise." For a long second, neither of us spoke. Only the cicadas filled the silence. Then she lowered the flashlight. "You can't prove anything," she said. "I don't have to," I said back. "The land already told me." Her jaw clenched. "You think this is over? You embarrassed me in court, made me a joke in my own community. You don't get to win." I stepped closer, hands still loose at my sides. "Melissa, this isn't a game. You keep this up, someone's going to get hurt. Maybe not me, but you? You're already cracking." Her flashlight trembled slightly in her grip. You don't understand what this neighborhood was supposed to be. We built this place to be perfect, safe, orderly. I looked at her, really looked, past the armor, past the fake calm. She wasn't angry anymore. She was scared. Of losing control, of being forgotten, of chaos seeping into her picture-perfect cul-de-sac. You can't poison chaos, I said quietly. It just grows back stronger. She turned without another word and stormed off toward her house. The next morning, Deputy Ray came by again, not for an investigation, but for a chat. County lab confirmed the bottle, he said. Same chemical we found in that dead patch. Traces lead straight to her irrigation line. I can press charges if you want. I thought about it, about giving her exactly what she'd earned. But something in me hesitated, not out of pity, but because I knew where this path led. Every push just made her meaner. Every win just fed her fight. Not yet, I said. Let her live with it a while. Guilt will eat her faster than court. But guilt wasn't her fuel. Control was. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I saw something new rising behind her yard, a row of tall green hedges being planted by a landscaping crew. Dense, fast-growing evergreens, spaced tight. A living wall. She was rebuilding, not retreating. Over the next few days, those hedges grew into a barrier taller than a man. She installed sprinklers, motion lights, even a row of tiny private property signs hammered into the soil like warning teeth. One afternoon, as I worked by the fence, she appeared on the other side, calm, composed, like nothing had ever happened. Just so you know, she said, voice sweet but sharp. This is my peace offering. Green, natural, neighborly, I nodded. Long as you don't water it with poison, we'll get along fine. Her smile froze, and just like that, the war resumed, quiet this time under the surface, like two roots fighting for the same soil. But she didn't know what I'd already done. 2 days earlier, I'd called the county environmental inspector, not to press charges, but to file a soil report. They came, took samples, and left without a word. The results would take a week. That week passed slow, heavy with tension. At night, I'd see her lights flicker on and off through the hedges, hear the hum of her sprinkler system running too long. It wasn't peace. It was the calm of a storm drawing breath. Then the report came. The county posted a notice on her lawn, soil contamination, area under investigation. Bright orange visible from the road. Neighbors whispered. HOA meetings turned awkward. For once no one looked at me. They looked at her. And for the first time since this feud began, Melissa Vaughn closed her curtains. When people like Melissa Vaughn feel cornered, they don't break, they lash out. And after that orange contamination notice went up on her lawn, I knew the silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. For a few days she stayed invisible. Curtains drawn, gate closed, sprinkler system dead quiet. The hedges she'd planted drooped in the August heat, thirsty and unwatered. Even her perfect lawn started to brown at the edges. But peace, like rain in a drought, never lasts. It started on a Thursday night. I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee and listening to the night hum when I heard the first sound. A dull thunk, like something landing in the gravel by my gate. I walked out with my flashlight and found it, an egg, cracked and leaking into the dirt. A second one lay a few feet away, then a third splattered against the fence post. I looked across the road. Her upstairs window was dark, but the drapes twitched. Childish, I thought. But childish things, when mixed with malice, can still do harm. The next morning, there were tire marks in my driveway, muddy, deliberate, and someone had scrawled hillbilly hazard on my mailbox in red chalk. I washed it off before breakfast, though the taste of irritation stayed with me all day. By Saturday, things had escalated. When I came home from town, my cattle gate was unlatched. Again, my stomach dropped. I sprinted out to the field, calling for the herd. They were fine, thank God, grazing in the far pasture, calm and contained. But the latch was cut, clean through, same as the first time, months back. Only this time I'd prepared. A small trail camera hung beneath the fence post, hidden behind a cluster of sagebrush. I'd set it weeks ago, just in case. That night I took the SD card inside, plugged it into my laptop, and waited for the truth to appear. And there it was. grainy, black and white footage. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. A figure in a hooded jacket crouched by the gate. The beam of a flashlight flickered briefly, enough to catch her profile. Even in low light, even in grain, there was no mistaking her. Melissa Vaughn. I stared at the screen for a long minute, anger settling into something colder. Not rage, not surprise, just confirmation. The next morning, I called Deputy Ray. He didn't even sound shocked when I told him. "She's gone too far this time," he said. "You want me to come collect the footage?" "Yeah," I said. "Bring a warrant while you're at it," he chuckled. "Oh, I will." By noon, the sheriff's SUV was parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked through blinds while Ray knocked on her door. She answered, all perfume and indignation, the picture of innocence. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw her face change when he showed her the photo stills. Her lips parted, color drained from her cheeks. Then, like clockwork, the tears came. She clutched her chest, shaking her head, mouthing words like mistake and misunderstanding. Ray wasn't buying it. He handed her a citation and walked her back inside to gather a statement. By evening, the story had made its way through every porch and patio in Sycamore. Ridge, the queen of rules, had been caught breaking one, on camera. But I didn't celebrate because something in her eyes that morning told me this wasn't over. She wasn't just angry, she was cornered. And a cornered animal is unpredictable. 3 nights later, it happened. I woke to the smell of smoke. Not the sharp sting of a fire. No, this was faint, oily, chemical. I threw on my boots and rushed outside. The source was the back fence, the one closest to her yard. My flashlight beam caught it, a dark, slick substance smeared along the lower planks, glistening like tar. Diesel fuel. Someone had poured it along the fence line, maybe hoping to send a message. It hadn't ignited, probably too damp from the dew, but the intent was clear. I didn't call the sheriff right away. I grabbed the garden hose and washed it clean first, then took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it all settle deep in my chest. It wasn't just a feud anymore. It was a war with no honor. At dawn, I went to her house. She answered before I even knocked, standing there in a robe, her face pale and sleepless. "You came to threaten me again?" she asked, voice thin but sharp. "No," I said quietly. "I came to tell you to stop before someone gets hurt." She laughed, a brittle sound, half hysteria, half despair. "You ruined me, Eli. My reputation, my home, my standing with the board. What do I have left to lose?" "Your freedom," I said simply. Her laughter stopped. For a long second, we just stared at each other. The morning sun glinted through the trees, catching the streaks of exhaustion beneath her eyes. She looked like someone running out of fight but too proud to surrender. Finally, she said, "You think you've won? Wait till the HOA hears your land is contaminating our water line." That made me pause. "What are you talking about?" She smiled, not sweet this time, but sly. "You'll see." 2 days later, I did. A county inspector's truck rolled up unannounced. They tested my soil, my runoff, even my well water. Turns out, someone had filed a complaint, anonymous but specific, claiming I'd been dumping animal waste near the shared drainage ditch. It was a lie, of course. But it was a smart lie, one that bought her time, shifted suspicion, and painted her as the victim again. For a week, tension simmered. The HOA board called another emergency meeting. Flyers went out. Whispers spread about unsafe practices and health hazards. I didn't bother defending myself online. I let the facts speak. When the test results came back, they showed zero contamination, not a trace of bacteria or chemical runoff. My land was clean, cleaner, in fact, than the samples taken from her yard. The county posted a second notice right beneath the first one on her lawn. Violation source confirmed, 42 Sycamore Lane. Her address. That was the moment she snapped. That night, she stood in her driveway screaming into the dark, her voice echoing across the cul-de-sac. I didn't catch all the words, just fragments. Liar, ruined, traitors. Neighbors watched from windows, lights flicking on one by one. When the police finally came to calm her down, she didn't fight. She just stood there, shaking, eyes fixed on my house like she could burn it down by will alone. And as they led her back inside, I realized something unsettling. For the first time since this feud began. I didn't feel victory, I just felt tired. There's a certain quiet that settles over a neighborhood after a storm. Not peace exactly, more like exhaustion wearing a mask. That's what Sycamore Ridge felt like in the days after Melissa's breakdown. A suburb holding its breath, afraid that exhaling might start another fight. The HOA board suspended her pending review. Their polite phrasing couldn't hide what it meant. She was out, at least for now. I'd see her car parked in the driveway every morning, nose crooked, a dent in the hood from that gate fiasco she still hadn't repaired. Curtains drawn. No music, no porch lights, no invitations to the Saturday socials she used to run like clockwork. But I knew better than to think it was finished. Melissa didn't fade. She waited. That week, I replaced the last of the damaged fence with new steel posts and double-stranded wire. The pasture looked solid again, every line tight, every corner braced. My herd was calm, the air was clean, and for the first time in months, the only sounds at night were the crickets and the steady breathing of 50 cattle settling into sleep. Then came the envelope. White, thick, unmarked, left in my mailbox without a stamp. Inside, a single page typed in bold letters. You think you're safe behind that fence, but you're not the only one who knows where the wire ends. No signature, no address, just those words. I stared at it for a long time, feeling that old familiar coil of tension in my gut. I folded it neatly, slipped it into a plastic bag, and called Deputy Ray. He came out within the hour, chewing on a stick of gum, notebook in hand. You got yourself a stalker, he said, squinting at the note. And we both know who'd bother with this kind of poetry. He filed another report and told me to stay alert. Cameras, lights, locks, the usual advice. I already had all three. What I didn't have was trust and stillness. That night, I didn't sleep much. Around 2 a.m, a light flared near her property. Not a porch bulb and too bright, too high, a drone. Its red eye drifted over the pasture, humming like an oversized wasp. I watched it from my porch until it moved toward my barn. I stepped inside, grabbed the long-handled rake by the door, and waited. When the drone dipped lower, scanning my roof, I swung. The metal pole connected with a satisfying crack. The machine tumbled into the grass, blinking like a wounded insect. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. Store-bought standard camera rig, still warm from the battery. On its underside was a sticker. Vaughn Property Management, Inc. Subtlety was never her strong suit. By dawn, Ray had collected the drone and added harassment to the growing list of charges. The sheriff's office warned her once again to stay off my land, and for a moment, it seemed to work. But Melissa didn't go down quietly. She went loudly, the only way she knew how. 2 days later, the HOA called a community meeting. Flyers went out, half the neighborhood showed up. And though she'd been suspended, Melissa came anyway, wearing a cream blazer and that same icy smile that used to make grown men shrink. I stood in the back while she took the microphone, pretending she still had authority. She spoke about neighborhood values and containing rural hazards, her voice trembling with the strain of reclaiming control. But every word only reminded folks of the chaos she'd caused. A few nodded politely. Most crossed their arms. Then she turned toward me. This man, she said, voice rising, has made a mockery of our rules, of everything Sycamore Ridge stands for. He brought livestock into a residential area, endangered property values, and humiliated this community. I felt every eye turn in my direction. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just looked at her, steady as fence posts in the wind. The board chair, a mild man named Jeffries, cleared his throat and asked, "Melissa, you're no longer recognized to speak on behalf of the HOA." She froze, the microphone squealing in her grip. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You'll regret this." "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you already cost us enough regret." The gavel fell, and the room burst into low murmurs. Melissa's face went blank, not angry, not shocked, just empty, like something inside her had finally cracked and left her hollow. She left without another word, the echo of her heels clicking like a retreating metronome. That night, her house went dark again. No lights, no movement. For 3 days straight, nothing stirred behind those drapes. Then, Early Friday morning, I woke to the sound of engines. Not cars, not trucks. Helicopter rotors. I stepped onto the porch in disbelief. A livestock transport helicopter hovered above the cul-de-sac, wind whipping through the trees. Below it, 3 men in reflective vests guided trailers toward the edge of my property. And there, at the center of it all, stood Melissa Vaughn, arms folded, shouting orders into the roar. She was trying to remove my cattle. I jogged down to the fence, shouting over the blades. "You've lost your mind, Melissa." "Those aren't your animals?" She pointed up, screaming something I couldn't hear, but I caught the shape of one word on her lips. Menace. The helicopter dropped lower, its sling dangling toward the herd. The cows scattered, startled, pressing against the far fence line. One of the handlers shouted, waving his arms trying to herd them like sheep. A fool's errand. "Back off." I yelled, "You're scaring them." They didn't listen. The bull, a big brindled steer named Rusty, lowered his head and charged, not at the men but at the noise. The downwash from the rotors spooked the others, and within seconds, the field erupted into chaos. Rusty slammed into the gate with a sound like thunder, splintering the top hinge. The sling dropped too low, snagging the steel crossbar. The helicopter strained. The cable taut. Then, with a metallic shriek, the entire gate tore free from the posts. For one absurd, glorious moment, I saw it lift. My gate, her pride, rising like a flying relic, before the pilot panicked and released the line. The gate crashed straight down onto the hood of her Lexus. The sound echoed across the neighborhood, followed by silence and then laughter. Real, unfiltered laughter spilling from porches and doorways. Melissa just stood there, frozen. Deputy Ray arrived within minutes, lights flashing. The transport crew packed up in a hurry, muttering apologies about miscommunication. Ray looked at the crumpled gate, then at her. "Ma'am," he said, "you're under arrest for trespassing, animal endangerment, and reckless conduct." She didn't resist, didn't even speak, just stared at the ruined car, her reflection twisted in the dented metal. When they drove her away, the neighborhood exhaled for the first time in months. By noon, the HOA posted an official statement removing her as president permanently and apologizing to the residents of Sycamore Ridge for the regrettable behavior of a former member. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching the sun sink behind the fence line she'd tried so hard to erase. Peace, at last, came not with victory, but with silence. But as the crickets sang and the herd settled for the night, I couldn't shake the thought that people like Melissa never truly vanish. They just wait for another fence to cut. It's been 6 months since the day Melissa Vaughn's Lexus became part of my gate. 6 months since the helicopters, the shouting, and the humiliation that finally ended her reign over Sycamore Ridge. And now, when the sun dips low and paints the fields gold, the neighborhood almost feels normal. The kind of normal that only comes after surviving a long storm. Shaky at first, then steadier each day. The HOA is quieter these days. A new president, Mr. Jeffries, runs meetings that actually end on time. No more surprise fines, no secret complaints about my fence or the color of my barn. Folks wave when they drive by again. A few even stop to buy eggs or milk, pretending they never once called me a property hazard. Forgiveness is funny that way. It doesn't always come from the heart, just from exhaustion. But I'll take it. The grass has grown thick again, greener than before. The herd's numbers are strong. My bull Rusty still guards the pasture like a soldier. The same one who took down that helicopter gate. He's calmer now, though. Maybe we both are. Some nights, I still think about Melissa. After the arrest, she spent a few weeks in county jail, then moved out quietly. Sold her house to a family from Tulsa who didn't know or care about Sycamore Ridge's past drama. Word is she's living in some planned community outside Denver now. Maybe she joined another HOA. Maybe she started one. Part of me almost feels sorry for her, almost. Because truth is, I don't think Melissa ever hated me. Not really. She hated what I reminded her of. That you can't box in the wild just because you bought the land around it. The last time I saw her was 2 months ago. I was driving into town, and there she was, parked at the gas station, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She saw me before I saw her. For a heartbeat, our eyes met through the glass. No anger. No apology. Just a quiet recognition, like two soldiers who'd fought the same war and somehow both lost a little of themselves in it. She looked away first. When I pulled out, she was still sitting there, staring into the distance. That night, I thought about all the fences I've built in my life, not just around fields, but around memories, people, and the parts of myself I didn't want anyone to touch. Boundaries, they call them. But they don't just keep others out. They keep you in too. Melissa's fall taught me something I hadn't expected, that fences can't fix fear, and control can't create peace. A few weeks later, the HOA invited me to speak at a community event. Jeffries wanted to heal old wounds, as he put it. I stood up there under the pavilion lights, surrounded by the same faces that once voted to fine me for visual clutter. I told them a story about the first time I strung wire as a boy, how my father taught me that a fence wasn't meant to trap, but to protect, that you leave enough space between posts for things to breathe, that you don't build them too tight, or you'll break what you're trying to keep safe. When I finished, no one clapped right away. Then someone did, softly then louder. By the end, half the neighborhood was standing. Not for me, I think, but for the idea that we'd all been trapped by something bigger than a boundary line. The next morning, I found a note on my porch. Not anonymous this time. It was from Jeffries. Eli, you're welcome to keep your fence. We've amended the bylaws. The ridge is big enough for cattle and people so long as both respect the grass beneath them. It made me smile. Simple words, but they carried the weight of a battle finally won the right way. That evening, I rode the fence line with Rusty following behind, the sun bleeding orange across the fields. The wire gleamed like a string of light. I stopped where the pasture met the road, the place where all this trouble started. From there, you can see both worlds at once. The suburban lawns, all manicured and quiet, and the wild stretch of open land beyond them, humming with crickets and wind. It's a strange meeting place, order and freedom standing shoulder to shoulder, neither fully understanding the other, yet somehow learning to coexist. I leaned on the post and thought about the people behind those trimmed hedges, watching me from their windows, probably still wondering what kind of man would fight so hard to keep a few acres of dirt and a herd of cows. Maybe I'm stubborn. Maybe I'm proud. But I've come to realize it's not about land. It's about the right to breathe without permission. Before heading back, I fixed a loose staple on the corner post. As I did, I noticed something glinting in the grass, a small metal tag, weathered by rain. When I picked it up, I saw the faint engraving. Property of Vaughn Management. It must have fallen from that drone all those months ago. I turned it over once, then tossed it into the field. Rusty snorted, unimpressed, and I laughed out loud, a sound I hadn't made in far too long. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, I walked back toward the barn, listening to the low, steady murmur of the herd settling in. The wind carried the faint scent of cedar and hay, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out. Peace, real peace, isn't quiet. It breathes, it hums. It lives in the spaces you once tried to fence off. Now, when people drive past Sycamore Ridge, they see the same white fences, the same homes, the same rolling pasture. But if they look closely, they'll notice something different. A single gate, left slightly open. Not carelessness, not defeat, just understanding. Because some boundaries aren't meant to keep people out. They're there to remind you where you stand.